Welcome to this Automation Academy Mastering the Machine webinar for the 15th of April 2023, Tax Day. The topic today was entrepreneurship in automation. Hope you enjoy it. Good morning and welcome to this Mastering the Machine webinar for the 15th of April 2023. Today's topic is going to be entrepreneurship in automation, and I have discussed this before. This is kind of a repeat of that, hoping that people who either own businesses or want to own businesses are attending and hopefully will chime in and have some questions and things like that. In any case, this is a Automation Academy presentation, Mastering the Machine, and we do these every couple weeks, every 2 or 3 weeks. And sponsored by Automation NTH University. And of course, we do have a platform, IO Central, which is not terribly active yet. What is the Automation Academy itself? It is a membership site where I put some training videos for Allen Bradley, Siemens, things like that. About to put a bunch of back-off stuff on there. I did a back-off class last week and discovered lots of new, neat things for those of you who are into PLCs. So there will be a series of webinars on that topic. And there is a downloadable library, lots and lots of documents and things on there, including a couple of books I've written, kind of taken apart and put into PDF form. And there is a community, IO Central. You can find it here at community.automationllc.com. And we do have these regular webinars on different topics, sometimes with guests. So today's topic, this is some information that I got from the Ken Coleman Show. And Ken Coleman does lots of webinars and podcasts and things on getting jobs and things like that, and including starting your own business. And he mentioned some of these statistics the other day I thought were kind of interesting, that 70% of Americans say that they would like to own a business, but only 6% of Americans actually own a business full time. And that includes people who are doing things like this, just, part-time, probably out of their house. I'm not sure that it really does apply to full-time people who are making their entire living off of businesses. But the main reason he said that people want to own businesses, which makes sense, is flexibility of time and control of your income. And I'm going to address a couple of those things today. One thing is flexibility, time. Sometimes people think that they'll have more time if they work for themselves, and that's really not true. I think in my experience, you end up working 6 to 7 days a week, or at least thinking about your business 6 to 7 days a week if you're going to be successful at it. And as far as control of income, yes, if you're very good at sales, I suppose you have some control of your income, but some of that, it just depends on how hard you work. So some of those, these are the reasons that people want to start businesses, but aren't necessarily true all the time. So I think there's statistics also that say 50% of people who start businesses close the business within the first year. And that's due to the fact that sometimes these things don't end up coming true for them. Business forms in the United States, and I've been through most of these. Sole proprietorship, which is, I'm actually an LLC right now. I've been through the S Corp. I've never owned a C Corp. I am a sole proprietorship in that I am only one person. However, my company is under an LLC, which is kind of like an S Corp. The rules aren't tremendously different. As a sole proprietorship, all of your income flows through you. There is no way to kind of hide the income and bank it for future endeavors or anything. All taxes are due that year, right? So you're not able to hide anything that you are able to do with a C Corp. C Corps have to have boards of directors and things and make some pretty serious reports, comply with taxes, but they are able to shelter some of their income, not pay taxes on all of it. Things to think about if you do start a business, you need to plan it carefully. Is a business plan necessary? when I started my first business, I actually created a business plan, I think a year into it, because I realized things were getting out of hand. And business plans primarily address financial issues. So if you plan to get other people to invest in your business, then yes, you would need a business plan. They're going to want to see um, your financials and things like that. That's much of what a business plan is. It's projections of financial statements and things into the future. And other people, if they're going to get on board, want to see those financial projections. That's the main reason that people have to create business plans. I think informal business plans are probably a good idea as far as, planning what you're going to do in the future, but they don't have to be all the financial projections and things. Of course, you want to make sure that you're able to support yourself when you do finally jump out and start a business. Licensing and permits. Really, all that's needed for a business is a local business license. All you need to do is go to your local city hall or county seat or whatever and get yourself a business license. It's probably $20-25 depending on where you live. If you are something like an electrical contractor, you would need to have permits and certifications and things, general contractors, things like that. But really all that's necessary is a local business license. If you're going to start something like an S Corp or an LLC, there are further requirements for an LLC. For instance, you have to get with the Secretary of State for your state and do an application. And then every year you would be paying a fee for that LLC license. You make a very simple report listing all the people that are part of your LLC and pay. In my case, I think I pay $300 a year for the LLC, which does give you some legal protection, that sort of thing. As far as protection here, legal forms and insurance. In the automation industry, which this webinar is particularly on, you do need liability insurance. I would say most companies that you do work for are going to want to see your liability insurance. And I would say a minimum is $1 million policy. $1 million liability policy, I want to say, is costing me only about $700 a year. But at one point, I was paying about $300 or $3,000 a year for my liability insurance, and that was because I was building machinery. So if you're building machines and putting it into plants, and I want to say at that time I had about a $2 million policy, and I'm down to a $1 million policy now as a sole proprietor consultant. Of course, you're going to want to keep track of your finances. At one point, I think we had QuickBooks when I had a larger company. Now they have, I think Oracle has a platform and a lot of people use that. And I don't honestly remember the name of it. But financial records are important to keep. Used to be popular to use Peachtree accounting, things like that. QuickBooks is popular. I'll see if I can remember that a little bit later for a little larger companies. You may also want to hire a certified public accountant. For instance, I have one that a few times a year basically looks over my books and makes sure that I'm paying all of my the different taxes that are due through the year. There are city and county taxes, property taxes, things like that. So they don't have to meet with you weekly and keep all of your records for you. You can do that on something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet. But often CPAs like to receive things in the form of QuickBooks or things like that if you have a larger company. Human resources, when you start to hire, I'll talk a little bit about that as far as my history. That's a very important factor. That's your biggest expense if you ever do start a business, is the people that you hire, right? That quickly outstrips any facilities you own or equipment you have or anything else. The people are an ongoing expense and cost quite a bit. And other things, how are you going to sell, right? Are you going to do that yourself? Or are you going to start out as a sole proprietor? And do you have contacts that use the services that you're interested in providing? So all those things are things to think about. Um, Advantages and disadvantages of entrepreneurship. Of course, if you own a business, you can deduct a whole lot of different expenses. Anything that you spend on the business, as far as mileage, you can either claim your car as an expense or a percentage of it and write that off, or you can just claim mileage, which is what I do. Percentage use of your home. If you're working out of your house, you can claim a percentage of that. So I put little signs after here. That's a positive thing about owning a business, is that you can deduct all those expenses. But one of the negatives here is that when you work for somebody else, there is a match of your Social Security. So, and I think somebody mentioned that it might be a little higher than this now, but you pay 6.25% and your employer pays the other 6.25%. So you would have to pay that match if you work for yourself. That's one of the things people don't think about. That's an extra expense. You do have to pay your own benefits, and that can be difficult to get. Since I've worked for myself for about 30 years, I've been through all kinds of different medical insurance. If you can do a group policy, you have a larger company and have employees and things, you can get into a group policy and pay for that. If you're an individual proprietor, there are some resources now that honestly, I want to say 10, 15 years ago, they didn't have. I'm not paying much higher for my medical insurance right now at age 63 than probably most people pay who have to pay through their employer. So I'm doing fairly well that way, although I do have a kind of a high deductible. But that is a negative, right? You have to pay all of your own, whatever benefits you have. Your employer usually pays those for you. Control of time, I put both plus and a minus here because you do have more control of your time as far as what you do every day. However, customers are going to demand your time more often. You're going to have to answer to your employer, which is your customer. So even though you have more control of your time, you can take specific hours off. If you get involved in projects in automation, a lot of your time is going to be taken up. And as some people know who have worked in automation, you can easily do 60 and 70-hour weeks, even working for other people. Now imagine doing it for yourself and then adding all the bookkeeping and other things that you have to do on the side. So that can be a positive and a negative. Automation related businesses, and I'm going to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the things that I've been through here in the past. So my history, I'm 63 years old now. I started my first business. Actually, I probably started part-time businesses a few times in my 20s and early 30s, but none of them ever turned into a full-time business. I did start building control panels part-time in my garage while I was working for an electrical distributor. So some of my customers were people that I called on in sales, and they would have questions about, hey, I need a little control panel for this section of the plant. I can't find anybody locally to build it. Can you do it for me? And then I started doing that in my garage and did a pretty good job, so I would get some repeat business. And there was a point at which I decided to go out on my own and do it, and that was in about I want to say June of 1995, and decided to go out and get a local business license. And one mistake I made, I could have just continued working out of my house, out of my garage, and I didn't do that. I went out and rented an office, a little warehouse in the back, and started building panels in that office. And I hired a guy part-time who was in school at that time, ITT Tech. This would have been about 1995, 1996. Went out and hired a guy part-time to help me build the panels and things. Had lots and lots of work to do for about 3 or 4 months. I had gotten various customers lined up before I left the electrical distributor, and spent probably most of that summer after June doing the jobs that I had. And all of a sudden I got to August and I didn't have any work because I wasn't able to go out and sell while I was actually building equipment. So then I had to scramble and go do sales. So you can see a lot of the different services here. At that time, there weren't necessarily other people. You could hire somebody to do sales for you, but there weren't companies that would represent, a panel builder or something like that. And at that time, I wasn't really doing much programming. I got a laptop in 1996 and started putting small PLCs in my panels. I did have experience with Omron, Eagle Signal, and Allen Bradley PLCs, and would do small projects for people locally. And then met a customer who owned a machine shop. And that's one of the things on this list. I would say machine shops are great targets if you do control systems work, because a lot of times they'll have small projects. Some factory or something will ask them for a small station or something like that. See, I have a chat question here. Let's see, we'll address this a little bit later too. But in any case, went and connected up with a local machine shop, Morgan Tool and Die. And he was a guy also who was working out of his house. He had a little shop on the side and a mill and a lathe and things like that. And I kind of teamed up with him and started doing his automation for him. Just little things like that would be a little stand with a fixture on it with a bunch of sensors, and he would build this equipment, and then the customer would tool it up for the customer, and the customer would put their product in it, and it would just have a bunch of sensors on this stand that would detect whether all the parts were there and things. So kind of went through that. And then he hired his own controls guy, and all of a sudden I had to find other work. And I teamed up with a different guy who was starting a machine building company, and he was building packaging machines. He had worked for, I think it was International Paper, and he built packaging machines for them and decided to go out on his own. And he had a guy part-time who still worked for International Paper and was coming in at nights and doing his controls work. And I met him in Bertelkamp Automation, which is a local distributor. That's another good way to meet people, is through your distributors. Met him through that. And he said, can you start doing some of my programming and panel building for me? And I said, sure. And once again, started hiring more ITT tech guys. And the ITT tech guys would be part-time. They'd come in the afternoons, help me build panels and things like that. And I was doing all the programming at the time. Then went out and hired a maintenance guy who did some programming full-time. And he came to work with me. He was my first full-time employee. And I kind of taught him how to start programming PLCs. We were doing mostly Allen Bradley, some automation direct at the time. And I would kind of pencil whip the beginning of the programs, and he would finish them. And meanwhile, I was doing my own programs and projects and things. So that's a little bit of my history. That company grew to about 15 people. I closed it in 2006 and went to work for a big machine builder here for about 6 years, learned kind of how the big boys did it. At that time, I think the largest machine I'd ever built myself was about a $350,000 machine. And it took all the resources from all the people I had, all those 15 people, to do that size of machine. So I realized at that time it was very capital intensive, and I felt like I was herding cats. So I closed that company in 2006, went to work for somebody else, learned kind of how the big boys did it, and then left that company in 2012, went back out on my own, and became kind of back into the sole proprietor type thing, formed an LLC, and started doing, contracting, panel building, programming again on a much larger scale than I had before, because I had a lot more experience at that point. And then in about 2013, as some of you know, I started teaching a lot, teaching and consulting. I've done that ever since. Haven't hired anybody at all since 2012. So I'm going to go ahead and read this question here. Let's see. Tried to respond at the beginning, but I had technical difficulties. Thanks for putting on the webinar. My father has told me for over 20 years that I have the skills to own my own business. Absolutely. I've never taken the leap of faith. Now I'm at the age where I do not know if it's worth it. That's a really good point. You do have to evaluate that. Do you have the time? Right? That's one of the things. And I'm going to give you some tips here, post some tips on here of things that if you just do decide to do it, things to think about, and some tips of what not to do. Because I would say I've made almost every mistake that you can make, which is probably part of the reason that I ended up closing my first company. Anyway, these are some of the things that you could think about doing if you wanted to start your own business. Obviously, contracting is pretty easy. If you have people that contract, that contract, anything from electricians to CAD people to programmers, millwright work, assembly work, a lot of these things are contracted out nowadays. So it's just a matter of meeting somebody that does hire contractors, and you can start out doing things like that. Obviously, you've got to charge a little more than you would make at your typical hourly job for the reasons that I mentioned before. There is a bit of overhead. You have to do your own matches. The customer is not going to provide, if you're a contractor, is not going to provide any of your tools. They shouldn't be anyway. You should be providing all your own tools, paying all your own expenses, and then you have to bill accordingly. Other things you can do besides contracting, representing automation products. I've known a few people that have started as independent representatives of manufacturers, reps, and things, or distributors of products. Now that's a little more difficult because as a distributor, you have to buy all the parts and then, of course, sell them at a markup. So that can be harder to get into. But starting as a manufacturer's rep, where all you're doing is supporting the manufacturer's products, can be a good way to get into being a distributor. You can build up your cash that way and possibly distribute their products. But if you do that, you'll have to stock them. Systems integration, I've kind of separated this from machine building. This is mostly people who travel around with a laptop and program things, right? And make sure that you can tie together people's systems and plants. That's probably the easiest way to describe what systems integration is. For instance, a lot of times it's not only programming the PLCs, it's connecting all the drives up, designing everything, programming the drives, robot programming, that sort of thing. And you can specialize in any one of those things and get into systems integration that way. But you do need to know multiple disciplines if you're going to get into systems integration, PLCs and robots and vision systems and things like that, and tying those things together. That's the integration part. Machine building itself, a lot of times people start a small machine shop and then branch out from there and start automating the small machines or stands that they build. So that's an option also. I've known a few people that have started their own machine building company. Of course, that requires a lot more capital than the three things above it. You do have to buy a certain amount of equipment, mills and lathes and CNC machines, things like that, saws and lots of shop equipment. However, you can start that as a sole proprietor, maybe forming an LLC and then hiring people on the side to do that. A few people that I talked to on LinkedIn have started services. I believe Nikki Gonzalez, I think she's the one who owns a company called Quote Beam, and they find parts for people, which nowadays would be a very good gig. You'd run around trying to, somebody doesn't have access to, say, certain Allen Bradley products, they'll cross-reference them and find an equivalent and provide those parts to manufacturers or integrators, people that are needed to find parts. Sales, you can be a contract salesperson and represent other integrators or small companies. So those are all good services. And again, I would say the capital investment in those kind of companies is going to be pretty low. Training, of course, that's a lot of what I do now. You can contract to companies that provide training services. One of them, I've seen TPC Train Co. That's a common one. I contract to a company out of Canada called Automation Training, and they send me to different classes. They'll ship all the equipment to different locations. I show up at the location, unpack all the equipment, teach the class using their material, and pack it all up and send it back. Or in the case of what I did, for instance, a week before last, I went to Chicago and they shipped all the stuff to me here. I put it in my vehicle, drove it up to Chicago, unpacked it in the hotel. Nice thing about doing that is most of those companies pay you pretty quickly because they've gotten their money up front from the customers. So I had 5 students, for instance, a week before last, and did that training. It was a 4-day training, and then drove back. And sometimes when I'm doing those kind of jobs, the side benefit is I can go visit different places and do a little tourism. Like went to Tesla 5 different times for classes, and kind of got to go up into the Sierra Nevada mountains and Lake Tahoe and go rock hounding in different areas in the desert. So that was nice. That's part of integration. Can do the same thing. A lot of times you'll go on a job site and you'll get to do a little tourism and things. It can be hard on family life for those of you who have kids and things. You don't necessarily want to be gone all the time if you have kids. So that can be a harder business to start in the systems integration or training business. Some people I know, and I'm not sure who all's on here, I can't see them, but some people that are on here may be doing, for instance, recorded training. I know Stephen Gates, if he's here, he has a thing called My PLC Training, and he does recorded training, I believe. I don't think he does anything live, but I've done some live events for him where he's had some of his people show up, and I've talked a little bit about PLC programming, some of the advanced topics and things. So that's another thing you can do. Vlad Romanov, for instance, has created a company called Solus PLC, and he does a lot of recorded training there, and then sells those packages to manufacturers. Sean Tierney from the Automation blog, the Automation School, has done the same thing, and they're making their living off of that, some of them at least, entirely. Live training, obviously, either you can do it, you can stream it, or you can show up at the site. I tend to like to show up at the site and mix that in with my normal work. There are various things you can do for passive income, but they're very difficult to build up to the size where you would totally support yourself with it. So I do write books. I've written about 4 of them. And I make okay income from them, but not enough to pay for the time that I put into them. So the only way that particularly works, I would say, as far as writing books, is if you're going to use the books yourself for your training. And then they definitely pay for themselves. You have to have your own material in many cases to present your own training, at least training manuals, right? That kind of thing. Websites, I do have the Automation Academy. I know people that are succeeding wildly with those websites. Unfortunately, myself, I'm not particularly good at the sales aspect of it, which is a very important part of entrepreneurship. I think when I get in front of a customer, I do fine, but making all those appointments or creating online sales platforms is not really my thing. So I've thought about finding those services. Like I said, there's people that do sales for you. So those are lots of different examples of businesses that you could start, I suppose. Tips and tricks. So these are things that I've kind of learned the hard way. Don't borrow money if at all possible. A lot of people think, oh, go to Small Business Administration, something like that, and take out a loan. That really makes it a lot harder for you. If you can save up the money ahead of time, say 6 months of expenses for your living expenses, and then start doing something on the side, kind of bootstrap your way into it, start small, and make a little income that will pay your own way as you grow. That is much better. As an example, my first business, I built up to doing maybe $1 million, $2 million a year, but I took out credit card, extensions and some bank loans when I first started. And even though I was making good income, I never paid those off until I closed the business. which is that's just one of the side effects of it. I always seem to have some reason that I needed either more equipment, so I was keeping a line of credit. Keep in mind when you get that money, it's definitely not free money, and you do have to pay it back at some point. I kind of just had a floating line of credit most of the time. That was not the best idea in retrospect. If I would have stayed in my garage, I'd say another 6 months and not hired people too early, I would have been much more successful, and the business probably would have never incurred any debt. So that's probably my number one piece of advice if you can at all get your business started without borrowing money from anybody. Definitely have a plan. As I mentioned, it's not necessary to have a formal business plan, but you definitely want to have at least an idea of what your path is going to be and prepare ahead of time. Learn as much as you can. Now you have online resources that I didn't have when I started my business. We didn't have the internet in those days in 95, 96. So I kind of was just winging it. I did buy some good books. One book in particular, The E-Myth by Michael Gerber, and I think it's got another release now called The E-Myth Revisited. That was a very good book that kind of taught me all the myths of entrepreneurship. Gave a lot of good tips and things and talked about hiring your first person, et cetera, et cetera. Another thing that you can do to get information besides doing it online is find a mentor, find somebody else that has started a business and just kind of pick their brain. And sometimes those people will do that for free, just somebody just they're kind of giving back, and it's someone who's owned a business before, and they can give you a lot of advice that way, advise you as you're growing. Local and online resources, right? Like I mentioned before, one of my local resources, I talked to a lot of distributors, people who sold the equipment that I was using. And that's where a lot of my networking came from, was companies at the time like Bertelkamp, Roden Electric. I knew people there. Roden is now Kendall Electric, for those of you in East Tennessee. But I networked with those companies, and a lot of times the people that would call on me that would provide my equipment would also have information about plants in the areas that would be doing certain projects, and maybe provide introductions to some of the people in those plants. So that can be really valuable. Networking is everything, in my opinion, in sales for a company. I at one point created a bunch of little flyers and mailed them out. I had a book called The Manufacturer's, I think the Industrial Manufacturer's Guide for Tennessee. And I went out and sent flyers to like hundreds and hundreds of people. I had names, engineering managers, maintenance managers. How many responses do you think I got? I got exactly 0. So that was by mail. That was not successful. I spent a lot of time and a lot of money sending those out and got 0 responses. Nowadays, people, of course, send emails and things, and I have to think that just emailing people, cold calling, is going to get you very few responses unless you get really lucky and happen to have exactly what somebody needs. A lot of times it ends up being more spammy than anything else. So in-person networking, getting to know people, is by far the best way. I'd say all of my jobs in my first company were either through word of mouth or relationships that I had, that somebody introduced me to somebody else. I did work for some plant. They would introduce me to somebody maybe at a neighboring plant. And I ended up having, I'd say, 5 or 6 main customers that I had very good contacts with and did repeat work for. So if you do good jobs for people, you will network yourself into doing more business that way. Track everything. For me, I'm huge on, folders and notebooks and taking notes and keep track of everything you do. A lot of times you'll be able to go back and look at something you did a couple years ago and say, okay, well, I need to do this again. Here's how I did it last time. Nowadays, you can do it with things like spreadsheets. At the time, again, in the 90s, I think Microsoft Office wasn't out. I think Excel was out then, but we had things like, Lotus and things like that weren't quite as capable as nowadays. So those are pretty much the any little tips and tricks that I would have. Let's see what else we got. That's pretty much it. Are there any questions, comments? I notice there's a few people on here. I can see at the top how many people are viewing. There's a few folks. Any questions, comments? Okay. So I actually do see myself. That's good. So
You still there, Frank?
yeah, still there.
So,
So weird. Oh, there we go. And even the video came back up. For some reason, the screen just disappeared. Couldn't see who was on. Couldn't see who was doing what. I saw James Hoover was on here for a while. Hi, Phil. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well.
Yeah. And Matt, great to see you, man. You've stopped into a few of these. Matt originated the name IO Central. So
no, I really enjoy automation and automation controls. I would classify myself as a learner, and I don't think I'll ever get beyond that.
well, don't sell yourself short. It's like I teach people a lot of times in classes, and they say kind of the same thing. Oh, I'll never know a lot about this. And then I ask them questions about what they do at their plant, and they tell me all kinds of things that they know about the machinery at that specific plant. So it's like, you may not realize it, but you're an expert on this particular type of drive or on servicing this type of equipment. All those things have value. And nowadays you could put your shingle out and say, these are all things I have expertise in. Do you need any help? You know?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, more or less, I probably do sell myself short, but we installed a new drive on a motor that wouldn't run. I did all the troubleshooting. Yep, it's a drive issue. So we installed this new drive, and typically, if you get a drive for 480, all the parameters internally are already set for 480. But for some reason, this drive, the internal, I think it's because it was not powered up for a long time. Maybe the default was 240 instead of 480. And so we didn't get the voltage we needed to run the motor. So yeah, it would run uncoupled, but it would not run under a load.
Wow.
And so I put a young guy on. It's like, look, it's going to be in this parameter group of 40 parameters.
Yep.
Look for something of limiting hertz. So something's not making sense, and so he found it. So good for him.
Yep. My experience with drives, I've always commissioned brand new drives. I've never had to service the old ones, and I've never really had to modify the parameters too heavily. I just put them on there and they do what they do. Most of my applications with VFDs have been just pretty straightforward, so it hasn't been a problem. I see Danny. Is this Danny Brewer? Cool. Danny from Arizona? Okay. Yeah. I think this is kind of the end of the webinar. We've already done the little presentation thing. This is just the after party chat here, just hanging out. But yeah.
Yeah, sorry I missed it. I was looking forward to it, but had to do some electrical work this morning. So
I hear you. Yeah, Danny, you started your own business. How long ago?
it's been about a year now,
Okay.
just over a year.
Yeah. So that was kind of the topic. I was just mostly giving my experience with it. I think people mostly just listened and hung out. James Hoover was here for a while, and Matt and Phil. But other than that, yeah, just put some pointers out there. It'll be on YouTube. I always post the videos on YouTube.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Yeah, I would look forward to that because we do electrical and instrumentation. I've been done electrical for 12 years, got into the instrumentation field about 7 years ago, and I love it. It's fun, but it being a good instrument tech, you really just have interest into the logic and programming skills, and I started getting those when I was in maintenance. But now I kind of got hooked, but I haven't been able to do much programming the last 2 years. So it's desirable for me for different reasons. Some of it's the flexibility, being able to work from home or work remotely, and just the creativity of it. It's cool. You get to see a lot of things, and just making things work is always exciting. But I want to get back into it, but I'm not the type of contractor to oversell services and say, oh yeah, I can do your whole utility plant, because I've only done small skids and stuff like that, some simple pit loops and stuff,
Yeah.
pressure and flow, temperature.
One of the things I mentioned during the webinar is, you network with the vendors that you have. And a lot of times you may network yourself, for instance, into somebody who owns a small machine shop. And those small machine shops will build mechanical things that they need often very simple programs for. Just if all these sensors are made, then unlock a part, something like that, right? They can do all the mechanical part, and your programming may only take a day, but they need that service. They can't do it themselves a lot of times. They wouldn't even know what to spec. And of course, panel building often leads to that too. You start out just building the panels for people, and then later it's like, well, can you program the stuff in the panel? Or can you put together a system that does this, So, yeah.
Yeah, I was just looking at that this morning, what's required for the UL 508A, and because I had an electrical engineer that I work with on this project, we do E&I work for, and he wants me to get mine because the guy he uses, they're always backlogged, so there's a long wait, and of course with parts it is hard to get parts still, but it's something we're looking at, and that also too lets you kind of work from the office or work from home. Where doing electrical work is you're out in the field, you're in people's house. We do anything from residential to industrial, so it's it's you go where you're needed, but sometimes it's not. It's tricky to run the business and be doing service calls at the same time. So.
Did you say you were working out of Tucson?
Yeah, I'm in Tucson. You're from Tucson, right, Frank?
Exactly. That's where I grew up and everything. I've never done anything, industrial from Tucson. I did work for Raytheon, and they were using Vanguard, I want to say at the time. And let's see, ATS, I want to say had also an office there at one point. But I didn't live there when all that was true. I got my start much later when I'd moved east to the East Coast. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm at the U of A Tech Park right now. If you remember where that is, it used to be an IBM site, and then Raytheon has some buildings they rent from here. But I'm at a customer's site right now that they're taking. It's a R&D plant. They're making they're trying to make jet fuel from CO2 and hydrogen. So it's just a concept, and they're proving and they're getting investors, but they have a lot of control valves and pressure instruments and DPs, and we help them with all their E&I work, and they're getting a bunch of stuff. So all these airliners and companies are looking at ways, because they want to capture CO2 and turn it back into jet fuel. So they're just trying to prove the concept right now, but it's great for us because they've given us a lot of work.
Yeah, a lot of that grew out of the original Hughes aircraft that was there. I want to say 40s, 50s, and of course Davis-Monthan is there. It's a good place for storing aircraft, of course, but then Hughes aircraft built stuff out of there. Howard Hughes, that's an old name from the area, but that's, I think, where a lot of the aircraft-oriented things got started originally.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, but we're staying busy. But I would like to. I've been struggling trying to make time to train. Because I do need more training. I mean, my PLC experience is more on a maintenance level. I made maybe 4 projects from scratch, and the rest has been repair and maintenance when I was at a power plant or this water plant, which was good, both good experiences. But I would like to keep growing in that way, because being an electrician in your 60s is kind of that's a tough job, and I'm just not that tough.
Yeah, I avoid a lot of the physical work now. That's why I like teaching. I just tell other people how to do it instead of doing it myself.
Right. I mean, I like doing both. It's nice to have the option to get dirty when you want to, but man, doing it every day, and when it's 110 outside, whew,
That's right. That's the other thing about Tucson. That was one of the reasons I was really happy to get out of Arizona. It is unbelievably hot in the summertime.
Yeah, it's rough. I mean, you get used to it, but it's kind of stinks being inside all the time because it's just too hot to be outside during the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
That's
in
a
any case, yeah, I'll make sure I hook you up with the YouTube channel, and I also have a whole bunch of videos. So if you ever want to do free videos on YouTube, and of course the Automation Academy, how I do this, that's a more of a paid site, but lots of training stuff on there. And I think my the YouTube videos, I put some of the Odyssey series, and that's literally just me starting a program and then simulating and just keep adding to the program and showing kind of what the different sequences and things do on there. So that's on that YouTube channel.
Okay. Yeah, I want to check that out because I'm trying to invest in myself and continue the training, and something like that. That's what I've been looking at lately.
Cool. That's mostly what I had to say today. That's been my my history, and I've pretty much been through all of these things. I've owned a machine building company, small one, about 15 people. Done systems integration and programming for most of my life after starting as a panel builder. I have worked for manufacturers, reps, and distributors, but never started my own company with it. But I do know individual people who do that. Contracting, if you're already an industrial electrician and you have some contacts, that would be an easy thing to get into, especially if you're certified. CAD operators, I don't know anybody in the United States who has formed a business entirely based on CAD and design. However, it would be very possible. I know of a few people in places like India that do that from overseas, and has hit me up and said, "Hey, if you need me to, draw things up for you." I do CAD myself, so I often don't need those services, but I don't do 3D modeling. So if I ever needed a 3D model of something made, I would have to contract somebody and might use those folks overseas. Millwright, I know a guy here who I believe does millwright services as well as programming, and that is Schaefer Industrial Automation, Dale Schaefer. He's in the Nashville area. And seems to do well with that. He's teamed up with somebody that is very mechanical, and I think that's where they'll set machinery and things like that in addition to programming it and doing some design services. The part finding and sales, like I said, Nikki Gonzalez, if you see this on YouTube, Nikki, that's an interesting field, like quote beam. I think she's out of California. And closely related to that would be the sales. Comment here. People buy off of other people. Absolutely. In-person contact is the best. It's very, very difficult to make cold calls on people. That was the part I really hated the most about doing sales. I did it for a while, straight out of college. I actually was most successful providing solutions, kind of getting into integration. I sold Eagle Signal, Danaher, Omron, things like that. And a lot of times I would meet people that, hey, can you help me program this thing? Or can you help me put together this panel? We don't even care what's in it. We just want a black box to accomplish this job. And that's kind of where I got into the systems integration in the early 90s, and then kind of leveraged that into starting my own thing. The training, you obviously have to know what you're teaching. I'd say if you were an electrical person, you could probably go and find training jobs, even at local colleges. You might be able to teach for them. I don't think it pays very well if you do it for the local junior colleges and things, which is why they have so much turnover. The passive income, like I said, that's very much on the side stuff, but it's a pretty good side hustle you can start. For instance, this little website, the Automation Academy, at least slightly more than pays for itself. And it's a convenient place that I can put all my documentation as I create things, create new classes and things. I do host the classes on the site. Can tell you lots about that if anybody is interested in starting a web-based business, right? I've learned a lot about that. My daughter maintains a lot of the website, and she's been very helpful on exactly what kind of plugins to use, and learning management systems and membership plugins and themes and all that kind of stuff. Web, as a matter of fact, that's something, it's not really directly automation related, but building websites for people, right? That's sort of automation, because now websites can be sort of automated, right? Even the sales part of it is automated. MailChimp, things like that, where emails get sent out automatically. Notice those of you who are members or who have access to the Automation Academy that you don't get many emails from me, because I'm not good at managing all that MailChimp, and often I don't have that much to say in a written format. I'll post things on LinkedIn every once in a while, but I'm not good at consistently emailing and putting ads up, unlike some of the other people. Like Stephen Gates, I think, is one of the best at that. He runs that company, My PLC Training, does a great job of engaging with customers via email, the classical way, drip emails, programming all the emails ahead of time to go out on a regular basis. So that's another good skill, right? If you can sell, that's where you're going to grow a company well. But again, just because you can sell doesn't mean you can manage people. Just because you can do a specific job doesn't mean you can sell. So all these things kind of go in together as far as owning your own business. So this has been in the context of the automation business, but of course, starting any business follows most of the same principles here. You need to know your field fairly well. You'll need to do a certain amount of sales. When you start out, you are human resources, right? You need to manage your own people and understand what responsibilities you're taking when you hire somebody and what expenses you're going to incur. But there is lots and lots of good online resources to find out even more about that. I thought I'd just spend today a little bit providing my insight and a little bit of my history. Like I said, I started my first business full time. I was 35, I believe, and I'm now 63. So all but 6 years where I worked for Wright Industries, I have run my own business, and it works out well enough to at least more than pay the bills, right? But when you're working for yourself, it's kind of like just buying yourself a job to a degree, right? But I've found out that I really travel too much to be managing other people. So that's kind of why I'm just a sole proprietor LLC right now. In any case, that is the end of this webinar. The next webinar, I've been scheduling these now for 2 to 3 years. Little after the beginning of COVID is where I got into all this online stuff. And I've done it pretty regularly, but I'm kind of running out of topics sometimes. Anybody who is interested in being a guest, I've had a whole bunch of guests on here, but I think it's been probably at least a year or so since I had my last guest on here. It really goes more smoothly when I have somebody to interview, because I can ask them questions and bounce ideas off of them and things. This has just been mostly me getting up here and talking. And honestly, I'd rather have somebody else to interview. So anybody who is interested in being on this show, even as a repeat guest, Brennan Duggar, Tim Wilburn, Nikki Gonzalez has never been on here. I'd like her to be on here at some point. Alicia Gilpin, Ali G has been on here. Lots of folks. Tatsoft, I've had Tatsoft, certain companies, PLC Next, I've had them on here. Would be happy to do a repeat. Would love to have somebody that knows Beckhoff really well. I'm learning it. I taught a class last week in it. It worked out quite well. Learned a lot more about the platform. And as I mentioned, I will be putting more Beckhoff videos on here. I'll probably create an Odyssey series on Beckhoff. For those of you who do PLC programming, are interested in it, Beckhoff is a great program because you can install the software on your PC for free, and it will run a full simulation, including HMI, all free software, and it'll run on a 7-day license. Just keep regenerating the license. So I'm a big Beckhoff proponent. I'd like to find, like I said, some people. I'd like to have some people on here that know it well and cover some of that. Phil mentions here, yeah, maybe somebody from Opto 22. That would be awesome. Yes. And Phil's been my guest more than anybody else. Phil is my number one guest on here. I think maybe 3 times he's been the featured guest on it. He does a lot of edge stuff. And so he mentions here that Opto 22 as well, interesting edge controller. And Coon Bus, I believe Coon Bus has something called something Pi. But that's a Raspberry Pi platform that'll run some code assist and things. I looked a little bit at that yesterday as we were doing Beckhoff, exploring Beckhoff. Coon Bus looks like a pretty neat platform too. Revolution Pi, that was it. So that's something else I'm exploring. But in any case, yes, next webinar, best I can tell, May 6th. I was going to do it April 30th, but I'm on vacation and I decided to wait a week since I didn't want to do it just the day I returned. But that's mostly it for today. And anybody who has an idea for the next topic, like I said, I'm kind of running out of things to talk about without repeating. I actually did this November 5th of last year, more or less the same topic, entrepreneurship, but thought I'd do it again and provide a little more information. But for those of you who stopped in, Phil, Matt, thanks a lot, guys, and we will see you the next time.